Hey everybody, welcome back to Garfield of the Week. Today I want to talk about the history of title cards, their role in comics, and the weird path that they took to get to what we have today. I'll also show you some of the greatest Garfield title cards and talk about those in a little more depth once we get to them. They're absolute gold, so make sure you stick around for those. Before that though, let's cover a little bit about title cards and comics in general. So what is a title card? It's the panel beginning most of today's Sunday comic strips. They didn't always have title panels. In fact, comic strips as we know them used to be a lot more intense. Sunday comics started, believe it or not, all the way back in the late 1800s. And even cooler, they were printed in color from like the very beginning. This guy named William Hearst, who was an early proponent of Sunday comics, not an artist himself, he was just a publisher, described his publication as 8 pages of polychromatic effulgence that make the rainbow look like a lead pipe. He was right. Some of the oldest Sunday strips really were just swimming in colors, and not only that, but they usually took up an entire newspaper page. So that's right, one page, one giant, multi-paneled, beautiful comic. A good example of the early style can be seen here in Little Nemo. Check this out. It's got a title there, but not a title panel. So fast forward a few decades and, well, the Sunday comics start getting a lot less wind in their sails. I think it might have had something to do with the boom of regular comic books around this time. Comics got shorter. Along with that, the ramp up of the daily comic strips only being 1 to 4 panels long made it obvious that putting so much effort into a once-a-week piece of actual art could be frivolous. It's too much work. Despite that, Sunday comics did continue, and they were still the bigger brother, but they lost a lot of their share individually on the newspaper pages. They were starting to get cut down to only half a page, then a third, then a quarter, until around the 80s, we landed with the formats you see today in most countries. We started getting this clean, maybe 1/5 of a page, 5 to 8 panel comic strip, usually including several throwaway panels, in case the editors need to squeeze more space. This can sometimes include the title card itself when it comes to syndication. Space is such a premium in newspapers, and things have gotten very standardized nowadays, but it was the Wild West back when it came to cutting things down. Thus, we land where we are today with the feeling that almost every panel in a Sunday strip feels like a throwaway panel. Many of today's Sunday strips can be boiled down to 3 panels that render the same exact joke. Just look at this Garfield from a recent Sunday. You can remove almost the entire middle chunk of it and still have the same joke. Unfortunately, this is a very common complaint for modern Sunday comics, and honestly, just newspaper comics in general. This doesn't make me love them less, though, and it shouldn't make you love them less. In fact, around the 70s, Sunday comics were at their smallest. No titles, usually just 5 to 8 boxes, all of the same size. Around the mid-80s, when, like I said earlier, they caught back on again and sort of landed with the format we have today. I'm glad we still get Sunday comics at all, and I love the tradition of Sunday getting a better, bigger version of a comic, because Funny doesn't rest on the Sabbath. Garfield didn't always have title panels either. Before that, the name Garfield was just printed to the top left of the comic, outside of its margins. This was kind of the standard for earlier comics. Just check out this Garfield Sunday strip from 1978. Look at this. 7 clean panels, no title card. This was a common format for Sunday comics at the time. Then, on March 29th, 1981, the world was graced with its first Garfield title panel. Look at this thing. For 4 years, this thing never changed other than its coloring. Jim Davis made this one spring in 1981, probably high on meatballs, and said, "Yeah, this'll do. I'll see you in 4 years." Here's the final use of that famous title card, which came on July 21st, 1985. This is where our story really begins. Here's where the title cards start getting really good. Around this time, artists, especially the highly syndicated ones, were definitely aware that newspapers were trimming up their comics, and throwaways became more of a thing to consider when building your comic. They started throwing jokes into the title cards that had almost no impact on the strip as a whole. Sometimes the first panel would reference it, sometimes it wouldn't. Garfield is a great example of this, and in fact, modern Garfield still has some title panels that aren't just the word Garfield in a fun font. But like I said, here's the first fleshed out Garfield title card. It's simple. It sets up the comic strip's theme even as its own self-contained joke. And Garfield is walking on a hot sidewalk, and there's an egg already cooked on it. It's classic, right? It's a very fun era of title cards, featuring the name Garfield, always this font, just a different color, within the title card at the top left, and a tiny little joke. This format went on for several years, and here's where we're going to go over some of the best ones. Alright, let's start with this one. Look. John presumably bought a cattail plant, and the fronds look like Garfield's tail, so he's clutching his tail in fear. On to number 2, this one is brilliant. I'll never get tired of John's "Are you serious" look that he gives Garfield all the time. Also, Caveman John and Saber-Tooth Garfield, are you kidding me? This is brilliant. This one I just appreciate in general. There's no gag, really, just Garf being a detective. You can even see on the back of the paper here, it says Funnies. That's a neat little detail. My mother-in-law still calls them the Funnies, and I guess that's just like a generational thing. I always called them the comics, but I remember my grandma even calling them the Funnies. The Funny Papers. I still just call them the Sunday Comics. I don't know when that started and when that changed. Maybe that's another video coming. Okay, here's probably my favorite of this era, just for its simplicity and coloring. Garfield is being terrorized by some spooky eyeballs. Every once in a while, Jim Davis shows really good control over shading, and this little bit of two-tone shading shows it here. This is my favorite one involving food. The TV says, "Up next, Pasta Parade, followed by World of Waffles." And Garfield quips a quick, "I love this all food channel." Garfield. If only you had access to YouTube. Alright, wrap your head around this one. Like, do I even have to explain it? No. But I will. Garfield is shown having a closet full of his own fur. So, is Garfield a Sphinx cat? What are the lore implications here? Did he skin a bunch of lookalikes? Is he embarrassed about being bald? Why is he devilishly smiling into the camera? Does he put his legs in through the mouth hole? Does he have different sizes? What about— This is my favorite self-contained joke style one. John is asleep and dreaming that he's Garfield. I love this. I love this one. Here's another great self-contained joke title that leads well into the rest of the comic. Here Garfield has stumbled upon a rat restaurant. The rat says "table for 5," which implies a fat joke at the expense of Garfield. This one is also like a tiny bit morbid. Garfield probably ate all the rats here, and the cheese. This one overall is probably my favorite. It's so simple. Even looking at it now, I want to laugh. It's just Garfield sleeping, dreaming about sleeping. I fucking love this guy. Alright, this one shows some character depth that I like. Garfield has killed many a spider, but he's still afraid of them. I think now, canonically, he's friends with spiders. That's a topic for another video, though, as well. This isn't my favorite title card, but it's definitely a top 5 version of Garfield in costume. He's a Viking, but look at the horns. They're bananas. Anyways, he's threatening John with a chicken. I don't think there's a bigger reference here, but the absurdity is definitely enough. And so that era ends and begins this more free-form version of title cards. They would still contain the word Garfield, just now with a more varied style and font. They still have great jokes or visuals contained therein, just not as often. Oddly enough, I don't like them as much. Maybe it's the art style change of Garfield looking less cute. Overall, I'm not sure. They're still good and better than we get today, where the frequency of a good title card is maybe once a month if we're lucky. Okay, starting off with this one, an Austin Powers reference. I don't know what to say about this one, really. I like that Pookie is Mr. Bigglesworth, though. This one is great. Garfield is written backwards, because it's Garfield looking into a donut shop's window. I identify with this. Here's one that looks sort of similar to the previous era, but it's a Gilligan's Island reference. I love Gilligan's Island, and the typecasting here is spot on. I wonder who the professor would be, though. Here's another great one from 2004. It's just the cast doing some river dancing. Here's another perspective-heavy one. I actually really like these, and like this kind of flavor is still in use today, but like I said earlier, they just feel rare. I mean, come on though. Look, this has got to be one of the best ones, right? Look at this odd rod rendition of Garfield. Like, this is the best title ever made, despite its era. If I could get this on a t-shirt, I'd be a happy lasagna head. Here's another one from that in-between sort of era, like the Gilligan one from a little earlier. The font is different, so I don't count it as a third era Garfield. This is more like a 3.5 era. Anyways, it's a good old-fashioned Gulliver tie-down. It's a classic TV and movie trope. Here's one that is bridging the gap into the current era, but I still kind of love it. It's an Apple II version of Garfield. Look at this. It's just well done, and it feels fun. So around the end of the aughts and into the current state of Garfield, we're commonly left with these types of title panels. There's never usually a joke, never any really interesting art outside of it being referential to other famous artworks or designs. It just feels weird. It doesn't match the tone of Garfield. It's easy to call it lazy, but well, I guess that does make it match the tone of Garfield, but I don't really believe it'd be much more work to go back to the previous decade's more traditional feel, right? What probably happened is someone on Jim Davis's team just hammers dozens of them out at a time and they get tacked on whenever it's convenient. But like I said earlier, every once in a while we'll get a taste of a more old school title panel. Here are some examples of recent ones that evoke that old feeling. I especially like this one with Pookie and Garfield looking at fireflies. It just feels so much better than the odd, impressionistic Garfield titles. Alright, so my final just thoughts on title cards in general. They're awesome, but it has fallen to the wayside a little bit. One of the last great ones, and this is obvious, and this is, nobody's going to be surprised by this call out, but Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, Bill Watterson was a known genius when it came to this media. He totally just kind of brought comics back, not only into the future really well, but he also brought comics kind of back to what they were, and he talks about that a lot. In a lot of his writings that he's done, a lot of his interviews, he does talk about how much he loved the original era of newspaper comics and how much more artful they were, how much more impactful and just overall beautiful they were. And if you look at any Sunday run of Calvin and Hobbes, it's night and day compared to other comics of how well constructed the paneling is, how good the title cards in general. The title cards hardly even exist. He made the title card such an integral part of each Sunday comic strip that you couldn't even consider it a title card. There were hardly even throwaway panels. And if they were throwaway panels, he made them fantastic. So that's my one shout out, and how great title cards can be, especially in today's modern era. So hey, thanks for checking out this video. It ended up being more informative than I thought it would be. But I'm fascinated by comic strips in general, and they have a great history that I only just diddled the surface of in this video. Let me know what you think of title cards, or even if you want to talk about the current state of Sunday comics. I am all ears. Are they in a good spot? Are they on the decline? Let me know in the comments. Again, thanks for watching.